keystrokes and stuff? Yes, because I'm getting you ready for the test, right? So let's go over the first question. Overall done well. Just make sure you read carefully, right? What's happening to the one variable and what's happening to the other. There's usually an inverse relationship, right? Where one goes down, the other one goes up. And make sure you put them in the right cells. I'm telling the reader, what am I doing here, right? L1 goes price, L2 profit. I'm pressing these buttons, I'm getting my equation there. What's the maximum expected revenue? So that includes finding the vertex, so second trace max. So that is the vertex, but that's not good enough. You want to actually state which one of these two numbers is answering the question, right? So it's the y variable. And make sure you have units, right? For the domain and range, you had to find the x-intercept, right? Because you didn't know what the greatest allowed x value was. So you needed it for the graph anyways. And so I needed to see some kind of work there for that to get full marks. So it's from 0 to 103, 33, and from 0 to 80,000 and some, right? That's the top of our graph. So this is what our finished work looks like. And some of you, I guess, at the end of the day, I go by what you came up with on above, right? So if that jives, so if your answer is different, I still look for the relative position of your points, right? Like if it's way off, like if you put it over here, that's quite off from 103, right? Like your x and intercept. So I do look, it has to be in the neighborhood, like very close, right, to what I want. And then also make sure, this is I had to print this because I couldn't find the original. Make sure you tell me where the numbers go, and it has to be consistent, which most of you were doing just fine. Okay, you did it very well. You labeled, and don't just say price and profit. It has to have the dollar sign or feet or whatever. And I'm getting you ready for grade 12, remember, right? So we want to have that consistency when you get there. We don't worry about those things anymore. Okay. Next was the lifeguard question, right? The beach obviously doesn't need, or at least there's no rope there. There's rope around this way. So it's length and 2 widths, right? So the fencing available is L plus 2W. It needs to be distributed there. So I bring the 2W over, right? Subtracting. And so you end up with length is 650 minus 2W, or this, right? These are saying the same thing. And so using this, I figure out the length, which gives me the area. Some of you actually answer that, which is great. Like you give me the number in there. And so it wanted the length versus area comparison. And so this is the equation I was after. Some of you made a mistake higher up. So obviously you either lost 1 here, maybe even here as well, but then I would just honor whatever you got. However, if this is pointing up, then that should be a flag, right? Like if it's pointing up, if A is positive, go back and check. Some of you were mixing up areas, like you were somehow introducing an area here. No, your starting point is actually just like how much fencing is being distributed, right? For C, what dimensions would result in the maximum area? So I went and found the vertex, and this first value is my length. To get the width, I just have to take the area and divide it by the length that I got, right? You go this divided by that. So that is your width there. That's your second mark. And the area, maximum area, is just read it off of this. Some of you found the vertex here, it doesn't matter. I just had to see it at some point, right? So your dimensions, I'm asking for length and width. Some of you even gave me a statement, which is great, right? Statement is very good. I made some changes to this when you got this, but really what's happening here is, right, the elastic is going from one desk to the other, and they're both at a height of 3.5, right? It reaches a maximum height of 7, so that means halfway through, right? We start at a height of 3.5, we end back on a desk that has the same height. And so it takes 1.1 seconds for that to happen. So in this case, you have to divide, right? You have to divide the 1.1 in half to get your vertex. You're going back in time almost, right? Or back to the middle of this thing. So some of you missed that. You went times 2. So this was 2.2 for you. So you would have lost a mark for this step. But then I would honor, you got like -3 or something, -2.99, whatever here. That's okay. Just make sure you follow through. And then for your domain, it goes from 0 to 1.1, right? From here to here. And for range, you start at 3.5. That's the lowest height all the way to 7, right? So 3.5 to 7 is your range there. And your graph shouldn't touch the x-axis, right? Like this is it, right? You kind of have to stick with your domain and range. You're basically saying this is where the graph is inside of, right? That's what you're saying. And so time, seconds, height and feet, 2, 4, right? You got to go consistent, x and y, and then you just graph it like that. And some of you used a different scale, of course, so your graph looks a little different. Some of you looks a lot smaller. That's fine. You just have to be consistent there. Okay. So I don't think it will hurt to practice more of these, right? So just make sure you do that, and it will pay off. Okay. That's it. And let's talk about the test checklist. I am very sad to see that I didn't add a page in the back of your booklet. Like there's nothing there. Usually I add a couple of blank pages. Let me see here. I'm going to find one. Page 80. Page 80 is a blank page. What about the second? No. Page 80 is my go-to. This is chapter 7, right? Quadratics. And so this might not be as pretty as you would like it to be, but you have to be able to distinguish between standard and vertex form, right? So that is important that you know. I'm gonna, in various ways, test you on that. Maybe even ask you to explain how do you know, this particular parabola has 2 x-intercepts without looking on the graph, without looking on your calculator. How would you know just by looking at the equation? You can always check, right, using your calculator, but I'll ask you to explain. So we have standard here, and we have vertex here. And I'm kind of gonna compare them side by side, and I will give you some pointers, some reminders. The vertex form looks like this. The vertex form technically doesn't have B and C. If you were to work this out, like FOIL this all out, then you're back to standard, right? Then you would have ABC again. But if it's in brackets, then we refer to this as H and K. And so I know some of these things you will know, right? But A basically, just by looking at this, it gives you the width and the opening. C gives us the y-intercept, but I did talk about it a little later. It does a vertical shift, right? If you had a slider and you could slide and change the C values, it would raise it and lower it, right? The whole curve goes up and down. Is that blocking your? Sorry, I have big fingers, so I need to make sure I don't cover things up. Here, same thing as before. That doesn't go away. So there's some commonalities. There are some commonalities, right? So this and the vertex is negative H and K. And I don't know if you remember, this has been a while, right? But that negative, what it does is it changes the sign of whatever is in the equation. Okay. Here, let me see. I'll put an arrow in there. Change sign of H in equation. EQN, that's all I'm doing there. So that's what it does. And I will also add that K also does a vertical shift. Vertical shift. Tells us if vertex is above or below x-axis. And the idea is for now that I'm kind of talking about them side by side like this. Okay. Under the vertex form, you should be able to determine the y-intercept algebraically by hand, that is, right? You got to show work if asked, right? We did a couple of those. Just go back in your notes. I will make sure I hand all the ACs back that I have from you. So that's basically it for the vertex side, vertex form. When it comes back to standard, you should also be able to find roots or zeros, right? And this is basically solving equations. It's all the same, finding roots, solving equations. There are two ways of doing that. You can use the quadratic formula. Or you can use using a graphing method. And there are two options here. I don't know, we didn't do a whole lot of that, but it's basically you either put the left side of the equation into y1, the right side of the equation into y2, and then find the intercepts. So maybe just, you are literally doing the same thing. You're finding x-intercepts, you're finding roots, right? So just maybe go review that. And I'm going to box this whole thing in now. And this is primarily here, we're not really talking about a word problem, right? It's just equations. Do you know how to work with them? Do you know how to graph them? All of that. Very good. Okay. Determine characteristics using technology or calculator or from graph. So I could be giving you a graph and you should still be able to answer the following. Okay. Should always be able to give me the vertex x, y. You should always be able to figure out the y-intercept, x-intercept, or intercepts, and the domain and range. And always remember that the vertex also gives you two additional pieces of information. This one gives us the equation of the axis of symmetry. Equation, axis of symmetry, and this would be the equation of either a min or a max. Only one of them applies. And look at here at the side for domain and range. I'm just going to say for the domain, if it's not a word problem, we're talking all real numbers because it opens up indefinitely. And for range, it could be either y is less than or equal, or range could be y is greater than or equal. Let me zoom in. I can't zoom in too much. But if y is less than or equal to, then we know the parabola is going to be pointing down. If y is greater than or equal to, parabola is pointing up. And obviously we're going to make a dot where the vertex is because that's going to give us the value that should go in there. I would box this in and just say that this is no context, right? On the side here, I'm just going to say no context. No word problem if you don't like the word context, right? But that's just basic. That's what we did at the very beginning. You should also be able to graph those. And then this is now word problems. Context. Equation is provided. Plot 1 is off. Make sure that is the case, right? Regressions. types here. Make sure plot 1 is on. Because you want to use zoom stat. It might be that next year, whoever teaches you, the teacher will not use zoom stat. That's fine, right? You just follow. There are other ways of doing things. So, but for us, we do it that way. You have to be able to answer questions using second trace ... right? But you have to include units. Okay, so don't just give me a point or something. Always include units. It doesn't have to be a long statement, as long as minimum that I'm asking for is units. Graph. You need intercepts, scale, and labels. Right? Make sure you have that. That goes for all graphs, right? I'll just say domain and range should not have infinities, right? I'm telling you that this year, no. Next year, there will be some instances where yes. Okay. We're going to be looking at money growth or bacteria growth. I mean, even bacteria, after a while, there's a maximum that the environment can sustain, but then we'll tell you so. But for us right now, no infinities. That's all I have. The only other thing I'm going to tell you, and there's going to be minimal, maybe 2 to 3 marks worth of questions. Previous units. Chapter 8, converting rates. Remember going from gallons per minute to liters per hour or miles per hour to kilometers per hour, meters per second to kilometers per hour, like that kind of stuff. Just make sure your study sheets have rates. It's gonna be minimal. Like it's not gonna be, so don't be spending a whole lot of time reviewing chapter 8 completely, just converting rates. And one question from chapter 2 is find angles and justify. Remember the 4 pairs? Alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding, consecutive interior. But you can also use sum of triangle, like whatever. Just make sure you're able to justify. One question at the very end, so you won't have to worry about those at the beginning. That's it, guys. That's all I have. I just thought about it this morning. It's like, what am I